Mark Twain said that it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled. We'll talk about that and more next on Polygamy. What love is this? Our guest this time has been here several times in the past, and she is very knowledgeable about certain aspects of early Mormon history, including many of Joseph Smith's activities. We want to introduce and welcome back our guest, Kathleen Melonakos. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Got lots to say, so we'll just get right into it.
Yeah.
And talk about it. I opened with the phrase by Mark Twain, which you actually quoted in a book that you wrote and authored. In fact, you were our guest a couple of years ago when the book was first released. Why don't you tell us the name of the book and tell our viewers a little bit about it and where they can buy a copy?
Okay. The name of it is Secret Combinations, Evidence of Early Mormon Counterfeiting, 1800 to 1847. And you can purchase a copy either online through Amazon.com or MormonCounterfeiting.com or UTLM.com, or you can go to Sandra Tanner's bookstore. And we also go to shows and Sunstone Conference and other places. A lot of places
where you'll have the book available
Benchmark
for them
books.
too. Yeah. And the show that we did, the program we did a couple of years ago, the link was on the screen just a minute ago. It was flashed up on the screen next to your book, and you can go to those links and watch both of the shows that we interviewed, the interviews that we did a couple of years ago when the book first came out, and it has a lot of good information on it. So you can find the book if you're interested in this kind of history. You can find the book and read it. It's got a lot of footnotes, lots and lots and lots. You did a lot of research when you were preparing to.
Yeah,
have
you
the book
asked me what
published.
it was about. It's, I really dug into what I think really happened instead of the official version, because I wanted to know about polygamy, and because my father came out of a fundamentalist group, and I did not think that it was from God. I mean, I wondered, could this possibly really be commanded by God? The God of the Bible that gives you the 10 Commandments that say don't lie, cheat, steal, or commit adultery, because I saw a lot of that going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I started looking into it, and I just ran into so many side notes and other conversations and documents and things having to do with counterfeiting that I said, this probably played a lot bigger role in the Mormon story than has been admitted. And so I started gathering it all up, and there's a tremendous amount of counterfeiting evidence in the Nauvoo period. And I wondered, well, maybe it started earlier than that. And sure enough, I started really, and if you study counterfeiting culture, then you start putting things together because it fits.
Fits in the Mormon
in the pattern.
story.
What they did fits with the pattern of other counterfeiters of that time.
Right. In fact, we're going to do 2 interviews this time, and the second interview is going to be totally focused on the book. This part 1, we're going to focus on something else, which will include some of the things that you found in the book. In fact, and you came out of the LDS Church, and your family came out of polygamy, right?
Well, my father married my mother. He left the fundamentalists fairly early in his life in college to marry my mother.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a tension there between them. But
all this to establish that you do have a Mormon LDS background, Joseph Smith background. You do know what you're doing and what you're talking
6
about.
generations back.
Yes.
My great-great-grandfather was Heber C. Kimball.
Okay.
So, yeah.
that tells me all I need to know.
Yeah.
He was a character.
He was, I tell you.
Well, in July of this year, that would be July 25th through the 28th of 2018, Salt Lake City hosted an annual conference, which they call the Sunstone Conference, and you attended it. And you wanted to talk a little bit about what you encountered while you were at the conference. But first of all, for those maybe who are not familiar with it, why don't you explain what the Sunstone Conference is and its purpose?
Okay. We enjoyed going. We got to meet a lot of different people. It is a conference where sometimes 1,000 to 2,000 people come. It's organized by a group of people who have really used a lot of inquiry and research to see what the real history of Mormonism is, because they've had questions arise, and the Mormon Church doesn't encourage people to ask questions, but these people want to do that anyway. And so they discuss topics about history, they discuss how to know what you know, different branches of Mormonism, because
So they have little fringe topics and fringe people as well as mainline people, and just
there's all different ranges. The theme of it was threads in the Mormon tapestry. So it's the good part about it is they're at least exploring. They're using their minds. They're using rational inquiry, and so I don't agree with a lot of the topics that they had there, but their methods at least are, open.
At least they're open to questions,
investigation.
And open to investigation, which is very good. As we talked about this, you expressed some surprise that there were a couple of people there from at least 2 different polygamy groups that participated in the actual conference, and they were even attempting to gain converts while they were there. Were they there to just gain converts, or were they wanting to sway people to their way of thinking? Did you have
Well, I
much
got the
interaction with
feeling
them?
that they were approaching people, including myself and my husband, with their doctrine. They were passing out the King Follett sermon and the Adam God theory.
The King Follett sermon, huh?
Yeah, they were using that. Well, there were 2 groups there that I know of, the Kingston group and the Righteous Branch. So they may not have known that I am very familiar with with all the things that they teach, all the.
So were they trying to convert you and your husband to join the
Well,
group?
yes. They were saying, the one man was telling me about, can't love be bigger than just a
love?
Can't love be bigger than just one man and one woman? And I said, you're talking to the wrong person.
Don't go there.
Because I know all about it, and I believe in one man and one woman, as the Bible says. My husband's sitting right there. I said, we are a unit, and nothing's going to break that up. We're under covenant with God and with each other to be faithful to each other. So, but that gave me the opportunity to read the King Follett sermon, which I'd read excerpts of it, but I hadn't read it all in one sitting. And I was surprised to find, not only that I was surprised to find how seemingly almost persuasive Joseph Smith could talk. Like, I totally know that it's wrong, because he claimed the authority of the Bible for what he was saying. And I know full well that organizing the earth instead of creating it from nothing, and the theory that man can become a god and God the Father used to be a man, and all this idea of apostates being sons of perdition. Absolutely, those contradict the Bible. Those don't come out of the Bible, but Joseph Smith tried to claim that they did, right, in front of thousands of people.
And the very point that you made during our conversation was he tried to prove before that you can't trust the Bible, and then he turns around and uses the Bible for his authority.
Right, he already said, well, the Bible is missing all the plain and precious parts, and it isn't translated correctly. Of course, he didn't say which parts aren't translated correctly, but then he tries to, say that those things are in the Bible, which they even contradict the Book of Mormon.
That's right, exactly. And then the other group that was there is called the Righteous Branch, which is the Peterson group, and they were handing out pamphlets.
That was the Righteous Branch that were handing out the King Follett sermon and the Adam God theory. And the representative, was explaining the Adam God theory to me, and I said, "How can you believe that Adam was God?" That's not right.
I have a question. Why would they call it a theory? It was taught as doctrine.
Well, yeah.
In fact, I have Brigham Young's quote. I want to quote that here because the Mormon Church absolutely refutes the idea that it was ever taught as doctrine. They call it a theory, and it's never been a theory, at least in the early Mormon days. Brigham Young said, and I quote, "How much unbelief exists in the minds of the Latter-day Saints in regard to one particular doctrine which I revealed to them and which God revealed to me." See, that's a revelation, namely that Adam is our father and God. Now that's a revelation, it's no theory.
Yeah, but there was actually a talk given at the Sunstone conference on how the Adam God theory was taught by Joseph Smith, was taught by Brigham Young, was taught by John Taylor, was taught by Wilford Woodruff. At least the
I
first
think most polygamy groups still believe it.
Or 5 prophets taught it as doctrine, but now they distance themselves and say, so the Mormon Church has changed the very God that they worship.
Right, exactly. And that's why they call it a theory.
Well, now they call it a theory.
Yeah, because that releases them from the revelation that Brigham Young called
But the speaker went through exactly what they did and what they said. Yep. And now
I find it interesting that the polygamists are there proselytizing so blatantly, so openly. They used to, in the early days, they would not proselytize openly. They would do it secretly, and with a few chosen people. But now it's just like they don't even fear being held accountable for breaking the law. They're just there and everybody knows they're there, and they just...
It's been watered down so much with all the other free love going on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In the culture.
What were
sadly.
some of the other more interesting topics that were covered at this year's Sunstone conference that you wanted to talk about?
Well, two topics that we had a booth there, and we were talking to people and talking about the book and selling books. But I was able to go to a few topics, and 2 of the most interesting I thought was the one given by Wallace Jeffs, the talk he gave, and his book, which I later read, and then the other one, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but there was a really good talk on the prevalence of affinity fraud here in Utah and among Mormons. And what that is people just because they're a fellow Mormon or a fundamentalist, or they can gain people's trust just by virtue of being a fellow Mormon. And there's been a tremendous amount of fraud that's been perpetrated here in Utah by different people, and they've scammed people out of millions of dollars. And he went through
because the trust factor being
specifically, and gave certain examples. But because you're a fellow Mormon, you don't have to check on somebody's references, you don't investigate them, you don't look at their reputation, you just automatically trust them, and that you wouldn't do that, I don't think, with other people. You would look up somebody's reputation if you're hiring somebody. The affinity fraud is just higher than other places.
Well, at one time, we was talking earlier, at one time, a few years ago, Utah was the highest in the nation for white-collar crime, and that's why, that very reason, because the Mormons trust each other, and so the one who's going to scam others claims he's LDS, and whether
especially if he's in a position of authority,
right.
Bishop or stake president or General 70 or,
exactly.
And there have been people in those positions that have pulled off $1 million scams, and he named them. So
yeah, and they can do it more easily, I think, in this culture of trust. Just trust.
It was the same
trust
man
your-
that started the Mormon Leaks that gave that talk.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mormon Leaks.
Okay. And so what would be the so your final comment on that would be beware. Check out everybody,
Yeah.
no matter who what they are.
Someone should be trustworthy before you trust them, because there's many people that would take advantage. So yeah, of course, check things out, and that's what we're saying about Mormonism itself.
And Joseph Smith.
And
Yeah,
Joseph
did
Smith,
he
why
prove
should you trust
trustworthy?
him? Yeah,
And next time we're going to talk how he did not prove trustworthy. But you're right.
Right.
Trustworthiness has to be earned.
it
something.
has to be earned. Yeah, forgiveness is free. This was a sermon I heard once. Forgiveness is free, but trust is earned.
Right.
So you got to make sure that they're trustworthy first.
And don't be afraid to check people out,
Yeah, and do they
even if they are your bishop.
do they do what they say they're going to do? Do their words match their actions?
Yeah.
What's their reputation? What's their history?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I learned that early on in my life, because I looked into, you know, we looked into Mormonism, but also just out in the world, you can really get taken advantage of, and we moved to different places. So I always had to know who is trustworthy now where I'm living, as far as babysitter, doctor, you know, people that have really your life in their hands.
Right. Exactly.
So,
And so you talked about Warren Jeff's brother Wallace Jeffs. That was
Yeah.
another topic that you
that
found.
was a really interesting talk, because Wallace Jeffs was the half-brother of Warren Jeffs and grew up in the same household. And so he was in the inner circle of the FLDS until he tried to buck his brother. His brother was going to take his wife away from him, and he decided he wasn't going to allow that. And heaven forbid you do that. And so he started resisting, and so he told the story of how he fought to get his children and his wives and children.
Did you say that Warren Jeffs tried to kill him at one point?
Well, when he started pulling away and resisting, and his brother Warren knew that he had been exposed to the tapes that incriminated him so much so that he went to jail, then he started being afraid he was going to expose him further. So he started bullying him, which is what they do. And I mean, what surprised me so much learning recently, you know, so many that are still followers of Warren Jeffs, or that have been, don't know tyranny or bullying from what's
Right.
normal.
It's just normal life for them. Yes.
Yeah, that's normal to them. But, you know, threatening someone, if you don't obey me, or I'm going to take your wives and children away, or I'm going to destroy your life, which he was sure that once he started bucking Warren Jeffs, that his henchmen had sabotaged his car so that his brakes failed, and he ended up in the
Wow.
hospital in a coma for 40 days.
Wow.
So, and he's now speaking out, and has written a book, and he's telling about what happened in the FLDS right prior to Warren Jeffs going to jail and around that time.
Now,
So-
the name of his book is Destroying Their God, How I Fought My Evil Half-Brother to Save My Children, written by Wallace Jeffs. And I haven't read the book yet, but I will probably do a book review on the show. I usually do that, you know, I read the book and then talk about it on the show, but I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I found he was a very intelligent man, very courageous, very, you know, and the book's well written.
I saw when it came out, they interviewed him on some of the news channels. You mentioned that he said that the FLDS is organized crime. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, he said in a room full of 80 people and on video that the FLDS is organized crime. And he named the abuse, the seduction of the young child brides, and the ritual, you know, raping of them virtually. I mean, and about the other frauds going on, and you know, the welfare abuse and all. And like I said, it's the tyranny. You must obey, or else you will be punished.
Yeah.
And so
did he talk? Excuse me. Did he talk about the ritual rape of the young girls? Did he talk about that?
But he did describe it in detail in his book.
Because there's a lawsuit going on right now. It's real quiet right now, but I'm sure they're gathering evidence. But there is a lawsuit about a lady who is suing Warren Jeffs and the FLDS for the ritual rape that she endured through her early years.
Is that the one? She might have spoken at the Sunstone conference too.
No, it hasn't gone to court yet. I don't think she said anything.
Okay.
I doubt very much. It's
the gal who helped to put Warren Jeffs behind bars.
No, that wouldn't.
Also spoke
this is a different person. In fact, she isn't even named. She goes by K or some initial. I can't remember the name, the initial that she goes by. She's not even revealed who it is.
Okay, well,
because she went through that, and other girls that she knew went through it, and she was forced to watch.
Yeah, and how they can agree to that's somehow holy.
I don't understand, and they do it in the name of God, and that's, that is another thing.
It's really too bad.
Now he mentioned, or you mentioned something about the counterfeiting that he accused them of doing.
Yeah, he said that FLDS was organized crime. He used those words. So I went up to him afterwards and gave him a copy of my book. And I just said, well, maybe you would like to know more about the early origins of the Mormon Church and Joseph Smith, because I found a lot of evidence that it's been organized crime from the beginning, with counterfeiting and horse stealing and stealing and all kinds of things. So I gave that to him. And then a week later, the lawyer for the FLDS sent me a copy of a deposition describing where a under oath witness was describing how she was helping to manufacture counterfeit money in the FLDS now. And the Salt Lake Tribune has said that they are investigating it, and time has gone by though, and they haven't followed up on that.
It might be a tough investigation too.
So I don't know, but there's the evidence right there that they're still doing it now.
Well, and the Rolling Stone magazine put out an article several years ago about the Kingston group, called them the mafia, the polygamous mafia group, kind of.
Oh, really?
For what they do.
Rolling Stone.
Rolling Stone. They did an article on Paul Kingston, and it mentioned some of his activities, just like with the FLDS. So early Mormonism was organized crime. FLDS is organized crime. Kingston group is organized crime, and I know a couple of the other groups are as well, at least in activity, because the money laundering scheme at Washakie in Box Elder County, that 2 Kingston men are in jail right now waiting trial because of the millions and millions and millions of dollars of laundering scheme that they have been caught doing. And then there's the pawn shops that were raided, and all the stolen good was taken from the pawn shops that they had stolen and then sold in the pawn shops, and money laundering there as well. And then the underage girls, the child trafficking, child labor, bilking members out of their money. It is organized crime.
Just the free labor that they get from their followers alone. I mean, that's a crime. You should work for your money that you. I mean, it's such a different thing from an employer making an agreement with an employee. I'm going to pay you this much for doing this much work, and this is the agreement we have. And if either one of us violates that agreement, then it's off. Versus you are born, the old slave owners.
Yeah.
They were born into slavery. They had to do the X amount of work, 12 hours a day, or else 50 lashes on their back, and they're sold down the river.
They bring God into it because, at least with the Kingston group, I'm sure the other groups do the same thing. This is God's kingdom. We have to help build up God's kingdom. It's your duty to do this work with a cheerful heart and to help build up the kingdom. You don't need to pay for it because it's for God.
But that's claiming to be a God when you were only a human being. and because all their faith and trust is in one human being, person, whoever's the prophet, and no human being is worthy of that,
Right.
except the exceptional God-man human being who was God manifest, Jesus Christ. He's the only exception to that rule. But nobody is worth putting all your faith and trust and being told that they're speaking for God. How do you know that?
Exactly. But you can't question. See, they have that built in as well.
And to be bullied into that,
we only
terrible.
have a few more minutes, couple more minutes in part one. So why don't you let our viewers know how was early Mormonism organized crime? Explain some of that, and then we'll talk more about your book next time.
Well, there is a lot of evidence of counterfeiting, especially in the Nauvoo period. It was from inside the church, from outside the church, from accusations made by all different groups of people. But it's in the church records themselves where Joseph Smith wrote that his partners were counterfeiting. And it was, counterfeiting is a federal crime. It's in the Constitution. Governments have to have control of the currency or else everything falls apart, the economy, the ability to govern. And so if people are taking advantage of their neighbors by just printing up easy money and using it, it hurts everybody. And not only that, but they were oath-bound in secrecy not to reveal their secrets on pain of death. So there were murders that covered up that they were committing crimes. So that
and the Danites were part
I'd
of
say
that
that's
too.
pretty bad organized crime.
Now, you also mentioned that polygamy was the means of gaining the loyalty of the inner circle of men involved with these activities. And I read Joseph Jackson's part of his story where he says Elizabeth Durfee, for one, and I think he mentioned Sarah Cleveland, were two of the most evil women that he had ever known to be on the face of this earth, because they would do whatever Joseph Smith wanted them to do. And that would include getting brides for them, helping with the counterfeit operations, and the other things that they did.
Well, you mentioned, I know Elizabeth Durfee was one of the real helpers of the child brides.
Yeah.
Sarah Cleveland actually got indicted for counterfeiting. She was one of his plural wives.
I read that in your
She went to jail. She got out on bail and went to a different jurisdiction. But, I mean, she was one of the big counterfeiting people, and yet she's revered in...
Yeah, revered because she was a wife of Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk more about that next time, Kathleen, and as we get into the counterfeit, the book that you got, and some of the details about that. So, thank you for coming here. And we talk about truth. And truth does matter. Truth is not relative. Truth is not different for each of us, and it doesn't change. In fact, truth is totally unchangeable. What the Bible reveals as truth differs from what Joseph Smith said was truth. Therefore, a thorough investigation, as we talked, should be made, and truth can be tested to discover if it's really truth. We're going to continue our interview with Kathleen because she has so much more to say about the truth of Joseph Smith and his family, information that she has researched and discovered, all of which is very revealing. So watch next time here at Polygamy, What Love Is This?